gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone. So as quickly as it built up, our wildcard hopes and dreams came crashing down around our ears this weekend as that man Cole Palmer became a one-man wrecking ball. Often this weekend can be tough to deal with in the immediate aftermath. It can make people turn away from fantasy football, especially if you weren't one of the few who did go with Palmer, or like former co-host of this podcast, Nick, Captain Palmer, his overall rank at the moment is top 1k. It was kind of one of those where there's a lot to think about. But we're here to assist as always to help you face it down, deal with it, and move on. Plus, have some fun along the way, hopefully. Joined by Sam, who has been glued to his TV screen in the first half of the Saints game. Probably glad of the excuse to get away from that. You're all right, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been glued to my TV screen if my train wasn't so delayed. So I actually only had to be victim to about 15 minutes of it. Sadly, in that 15 minutes, all 3 goals went in. So it wasn't a great experience, but alas, we are here and we've got some FPL to talk about. We are Who Got the Assist. And on today's pod, as Tom mentioned, we will be picking up the pieces from what has been a pretty tumultuous game week 6 for both of us. Cole Palmer obviously went off and neither of us had him, so we need to talk about that. We'll discuss our wildcard outcomes and maybe if we missed anything in the process as well, reacting to bad weeks generally, so a bit of advice on whether or not you've had a bad week. You'll have one at some point this season, a bit of advice on how to cope with that. And of course, it's a well-trodden discussion, but within the context of this season, with the new rules and the pricing included, of course. And then, of course, we'll also be looking ahead to Game Week 7, the preview, including all the usual factors. It's Monday, the 30th of September. The fake South Coast derby, Tom wrote that, not me, but it is fake, is on in the background. We both have Semenyo, and if I wasn't a massive Southampton fan, I'd be pretty happy about the results so far. But for now, shall we talk about our game week reviews, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's almost worth running through where we ended up kind of on the old wild card. So looking a little bit better now, obviously not amazing, but looking a little bit better on 47. Basically take Cole Palmer out and it was just a bad week in general. But yeah, it didn't really live up to the billing, did it? I think we were both incredibly excited. I remember you texted me on Saturday morning saying, or Saturday afternoon saying, I need to be brought down to earth, Tom. I'm so happy with all the picks and I'm so happy with everything. And I don't think I need to do that, Sam. FBL can do it for you. Yeah, yeah, no, not at all. So basically there was just that Raya hoo-ha, really, that impacted things. So when we podded the Monday, obviously we didn't know that he was going to miss out with a thigh injury against Bolton. And then that kind of led into a whole load of different sort of things being discussed between us and just between kind of everyone in the wider community, really. So what happens if you drop Raya? Do you get Flecken in? And do you then get Havertz? Do you then do this? Do you then do that? And plan A for me was to stick with Raya. And I think there was just about enough, wasn't there, on Saturday morning, the hotel walkabout and all this sort of thing that made me think, okay, right, I'll go with Raya. I'll go with the kind of draft I was going with. Very similar to the one effectively that I presented the other week. And difference really was that I ended up with Luis Diaz over Foden. And I then was able to squeeze Ollie Watkins in on 0.0, which is obviously quite a good outcome. The only last minute change for me was squeezing Rico Lewis in. So I originally had, if you remember, something like Milenkovic and maybe like Anderson or some other kind of 4.5 like that. I just kind of happened to see that he was in the team and I just kind of thought, well, Mykolenko, fine bench sitter. I've still got Leif Davis in my team. I know that you eventually did go without. But I thought, well, okay, I can get 2 4.5 defender, like centre back, solid bench men, or I can maybe go with Lewis just in case this train, does go just start chugging along and it's too late for me to board. So I went with that last minute. But yeah, I mean, no Palmer, no party, effectively. I say, like, Bumo with a very late goal, actually, given how he's been scoring recently. It was like 35 seconds as opposed to in the first 30 seconds. So he's slackening a little bit. And then, yeah, Watkins and Rogers. Thank thankfully, I had them both in the team. So yeah, that 18 points on Sunday was much needed. I think I was looking at kind of a dip below the millions, and now I'm kind of around 500k. And Semenyo tonight, who assisted the assister on the first 2 goals as well. So again, could have a little bit more. See what happens in the second half. So yeah, managed to double my rank on wildcard. But I mean, them's the breaks. It can happen sometimes, and we'll speak about that in just a bit. Unfortunately, Sam, I think that you've done a little bit worse than I have.
Yeah, it's been a historically bad wildcard week for me. Yeah, all the sympathy that you were collecting there, having a pretty decent red arrow, can we please send it my way instead? I've got 37 points on a wildcard so far, and that is including Semenyo today. Obviously, that could improve, but it is against my own club, so it's kind of bittersweet if he does anything for me. Yeah, only 3 returners in my 11, including Semenyo, Mbuemo and Solanke. Both got something at least. Solanke looked for a very long time like he wasn't going to get anything either. And of course, I benched Rodgers for Calvert-Lewin, which honestly, I'd probably do again because Calvert-Lewin's on penalties, 90-minute man, up front at home.
Yeah,
I think I would do it again, honestly. Yeah. So I'm not going to crush myself on the decision making there. The outcome was obviously very bad and it looks bad in retrospect. But the changes from the wildcard that I might have put forward on the Monday last week mainly hung around Luis Diaz, I believe, or at least from some of my other videos. Luis Diaz was more of a later pick after some research on Friday. I really didn't want to miss out on Liverpool against Wolves. It looked like they were there for the taking. And having that extra million in Diaz meant I needed to find it elsewhere. And the way I did that was take little bits and pieces from other players. So Wood came down to DCL, and then Leif Davis also exited the team for Mikolenko as well. And then Lewis also came in too. So little bits and pieces got me there, and Luis Diaz did nothing for me either. So overall, it's very difficult to say this with a straight face. But I'm actually still really happy with the team I picked. Obviously, the outcome was absolutely awful, and we'll talk about decision making versus outcome later on. But outside of Cole Palmer, who's obviously gone nuclear this week, I'd probably have done it fairly similar anyway. I think the decision making was fairly sound. And as it stands right now, I'm probably looking at rolling into game week 7 as well. I just think it was a very, very harsh series of outcomes this week. Saka was incredibly unlucky. I went to the Emirates and watched it live. Saka was absolutely box office. Raya and Gabriel were unlucky, I think, to concede twice. I think it was 0.4 or 0.5 XG in total. One was deflected and one was a wonder strike. So I don't think that happens most weeks. Yeah, look, there's definitely mistakes in the wild cards. There always is, but I think generally I'm fairly happy with it. Obviously just a historically bad outcome so far, and maybe that means the decision was wrong in the first place. We'll come on to that in later on in the pod as well. But 37 points is the live score, doubled my rank down to 2 million. Not great.
But it does mean that you can get a massive green arrow sometime soon. So
Yay.
Taking short-term pain for longer-term gain, though. It's yeah, as you say, it's definitely worth discussing. A couple of other things from this weekend. One, I think just any talk of City with and without Rodri needs to be banned immediately, just because that's already such a tired narrative. Obviously, it got massively overtaken by what happened with Cole Palmer, and also Saka losing the BPS kind of the next day seemed a bit weird. So he was on free BPS, as you said, reflecting what was quite an imperious performance on free bonus. And then a friend of the pod, Bernardo's Maldonado, explained it to me that because that assist got taken away, he lost the chance created, and that then went to Trossard, and then there's all these sort of manifestations. But it does, as always, seem a bit, and Matt said this himself, a bit strange that this doesn't ever get explained, and it kind of has to be intuited by people. So yeah, a very bizarre sort of situation. But hey, I mean, that's just kind of the nature of things now. I know the friend of the pod, Jeff Pedder, had a question about this, but I think it all just comes down to just not counting your chickens before they're hatched, really, when it comes to bonus points. If you've got loads of bonus on the Saturday, Yeah, don't
Yeah.
be like sat there thinking, oh yeah, well, I've got all this there. You might well lose it.
Especially if it's close as well, because Saka, without any returns, I don't know about you, I always felt like he was going to lose them. So I almost discounted a couple of them in my mind going away from the Saturday match anyway. It felt surprising that a player without any returns was up there. And yeah, I mean, obviously there are some cascading effects of the assist being wiped and therefore the chance, but it felt a bit fortunate in the first place that he was on 3, and I never really thought it was going to hold.
Yeah, no, it was one of those. Like we've seen, like Pascal Gross, for example, comes to mind, getting free bonus versus United's and things like that. Despite no attacking return, so it wouldn't be like massively like never heard unprecedented,
Yeah.
but it would be unusual, and I wasn't surprised given how things. We've had it's come our way as well. We've seen kind of Raya bumped up to 2 or 3 bonus out of nowhere on the Monday afternoon. It goes both ways, and
Yeah.
it's a shame if you captain Saka and then you went to bed thinking, oh, this is great. Here I am with a few more points than otherwise. Then yeah, I can see why you'd be a bit miffed. But hey ho, and that's just nature of the beast, I'm afraid. Speaking of nature of the beast, let's go on to the disaster card. Just discuss it a little bit this week. So yeah, I mean, it didn't go to plan, did it? I mean, that's kind of plain to see. I think that it's always, as Sam said, you're always going to have a bad week at some point. And we know that everybody here is not on wildcard. Some people here are on a wildcard listening and watching. And we also know that some people should have stellar weeks. So hopefully we can. I think we do need to discuss the Palmer thing, but also I think we need to kind of just give a wider sort of context surrounding how you deal with bad weeks, how you think about them, and then, as you said, relate them to how this year, and with the pricing being specific, that has kind of come out online a little bit, and also how things like rolling transfers and things can also impact things. I think the opening gambit, the opening question, I think that's always worth asking here. Is it just variance that we messed up on? Because I don't know. It kind of feels like that's always ruled out. And I've done it throughout the last kind of few years, and you and I definitely had this discussion quite a few times. I just wonder whether it's kind of we're in a very kind of outcome. This is a results based industry, Sam. This fancy football malarkey, and I wonder whether it's kind of reductivist or too simplistic to say it's just bad luck. I don't know. It's one of those things that's playing on my mind that it's always convenient to just be like to give the other side of the discussion, of the argument, when you've not done well. Whereas if you have done well, you kind of just bound that up as kind of part of a bit of skill or something on your behalf. So interested to hear what you think about that one.
It's a balance, isn't it? And I think what you've got to be very careful to do in FPL is not be too up when not credit yourself too much when things go your way, because then it takes away a little bit from when it goes so badly. I think what we've got to be careful to do as well in FPL is the decisions we make are based on the information available at any given moment. So that obviously locks at the deadline. We have to kind of relinquish control at that exact moment, and then we're in the hands of the FPL gods. So to call it luck would be, I think, dangerous, because there is a certain amount of control that we do have prior to the deadline. But after the deadline's gone, you do have to hold your hands up and say, you know what, it is down to what happens on the pitch and we can't do anything about it. So I think if I was to circle it a little bit, it's a mixture of both, but whether or not you think it's luck is kind of irrelevant. What you have to be very careful to do is not just chase based on outcomes. You need to chase based on the data. And the only way that we can really do that is obviously on long-term data, and not on one game week where Palmer's obviously scored 4. And I think if you always chase those hauls based on the outcome of one game week, you are eventually going to come unstuck, whether it be because you've used up all your free transfers or because a player has just had one great game. That can happen either way. And obviously Palmer's not one of those. We're not saying that. And I'm definitely not. But there is a bit of noise to a haul like that. And you're not expecting him to do it every single week.
Yeah, we've spoken about resulting in the past and outcome bias, as it also can be known. The idea that your perception of outcomes warps your assessment of how good your decision making was. And I think that we all lean into it, don't we? So say that you chose a particular differential and hey, off they go, score 2 worldies. So extreme situation this week, for whatever reason, you're thinking your punting took you to James Justin, and there you are with a brace for James Justin this week. You aren't going to be saying that's entirely lucky in your own mind. You're going to be like, well, I was just brave enough to go there. We all say these things, but yeah, you're completely right. A lot of the time it is about trying to separate the outcome from the decision-making process, but in of itself, that can sometimes feel a bit weak almost to me. I don't know. I don't want to be a self-flagellation kind of example. You're all, and I think that it's always good to kind of separate the two just for your own sort of, I'm not going to call it mental health because I think that diminishes mental health a little bit and the real issues people have. This is just fantasy football, and if you are upset by fantasy football, then there's obvious things you can do. But some of it does kind of, I don't know. So I mean, online is a very different place now. I'm not going to go into that here. You've obviously heard all of my views on that in the past, but I don't know, it feels to me like blame needs apportioning online when this sort of thing happens as well. And you see the wider community, honourable exceptions being likes of Nick, general late riser, people kind of flail and kind of say, oh, why weren't we kind of informed about this potentially happening? And I think that kind of does take me back to what you were saying about that anything can happen on one given game week. I mean, contextually playing that high line, Mr. Hertzler, it definitely had shades of when Pep was early in the Premier League and was playing a high line against Jamie Vardy, wasn't he? And Vardy goes off and scores a brace. Like it kind of had moments of that, elements of the fact that if you did punt that way, or you did believe in the player, which is, it's not a crazy pick or anything like that. It's not
not at all.
Picking up an Evan Nilsson or picking up I don't know, Ross Stewart. It's definitely picking up a over the course of one season last year, and just with general eye, a general quality player. It's just people get greedy, don't they? You wanted those points and they're not there, and that can kind of, I guess, fuel your perceptions, I guess, about what's happened in this particular situation.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, we play an outcome-based game, so the results and everything kind of get ignored by the end of the season. It all comes down to the rank and whether you won your mini leagues, and how you got there is almost irrelevant, really. But what we're trying to do as an FPL pod, and a lot of us who are very engaged managers are trying to do, is kind of I suppose try to mitigate the luck wherever possible, and try to create a system for ourselves where we have a better chance of riding the luck and a better chance of greater outcomes over a long run average. Now, a 38 game week season seems like a long time, but in terms of data, it's not necessarily that long. Every single season we see players massively overperform, massively underperform. We've seen it with teams as well, Brighton being a great example a few years ago, where on the data they should have finished 4th or 5th and they finished 15th. So we see teams ride their luck, and very, very loud outcomes happen over even the stretch of a season. What we're trying to do as FPL managers is minimize the amount that luck can play a part, I suppose, in our overall outcomes. But there's nothing that we can ever do to completely negate that. We can't remove it altogether. What we can try to do is put ourselves in the best position, or the most likely position, at least, to get the best results. Now, the question then becomes, how do we do that? How are we able to try and not just randomly pick 15 players and just kind of blindly click buttons? Because you could do that, and then you could also just say that is FPL and that you're just as likely to win as anyone else. But we know that that's not true. We know that certain players are much more likely to score goals, get assists, etc., etc. And therefore, we cannot say that FPL is just luck-based. It's definitely decision-making to a point. But then you also have to admit that once, like I said at the start, once you relinquish control and the deadline hits, you're kind of in the hand of the FPL gods. You can't really do anything about the outcome. And there is a portion of players that can hurt you and might do all of the damage when all of your players, even though it might be unlikely, all at once could blank. And that could happen every single week, all season.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you would be extremely, extremely unfortunate for that to happen to you every week, all season. But it technically can happen. And unfortunately, that's the game we play. And like a lot of people say, it's an outcome-based game. It's not based, you don't get rewarded for your decisions necessarily. But I think more often than not, if you make good decision-making based on sound logic, you're more likely to hit the outcomes that you want to over the long run. But that's never a guarantee.
Yeah. It's basically like on Football Manager, if you save scum, effectively, you got to just you got to just hope you get that one week where everything comes together for you, which is kind of what we're all chasing, effectively. I suppose you kind of touched on it there, that you can't have everyone, and there's always going to be players that can hurt you. Again, a really interesting part of the which has become a little bit like something I don't want to be involved with online, but a big part of that was there seemed to be kind of a few bits of criticism almost about the pricing, that it was making things a bit more swingy because you're not able to have them all the same as last year, and it detracts from like knowledge of football, and it kind of plays more into the hands of variants. But I mean, to me, I suppose that's kind of what we wanted in some way, shape, or form. We didn't want kind of teams to be, and admittedly, yes, content creators and all of that sort of thing, there's always going to be an impact felt by there being several loud voices that are dictating to a lot of people how they should make their picks, because a lot of people don't engage with FPL in the depth that a lot of others do. But I mean, this year especially, it does feel like there's a lot of swinginess, and you got to almost take the good with the bad when it comes to Cole Palmer. Like, this year's pricing has had a huge impact, because I think in seasons past we definitely have seen that there's been the odd kind of 2 or 3 players who have hit a bit of a critical mass in terms of effective ownership, and we've kind of not owned them for whatever reason, and that has kind of detracted from your game week. Right now, it does sort of feel like you've just got to, I guess, manage the premium situation and the diversity there, and that you just literally cannot have them all. And I think that's what we were crying out for, because I think an event like this weekend with Cole Palmer is going to create a lot of differentiation. I'm sure I saw someone say earlier on that like almost 130,000 people have already sold Saka to probably buy Cole Palmer. Like, it's just one of those things, isn't it, that is always going to crop up, and it does sort of start to create those butterfly effects we spoke about last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's just about predicting future points. It's not about looking at who scored the points last week. And if you think because Palmer scored 4 goals last week, that makes him more likely to score more than Saka this week, then by all means, that transfer does make sense. But we look at the fixture, we look at the quality of the player over a longer period of time, and you make the predictions based on that. And I think Saka at home to Southampton, 130,000 transfers out, unless you've got a plan to somehow wiggle Trossard in as well, which is obviously a possibility. It seems like a little bit knee-jerky to me personally, but who knows? It is about who scores the points. And if you think Palmer is more likely than Saka to score points this week and for the next few weeks, then by all means, go for it. But yeah, I think the discourse online around content creators as well, at the end of the day, we all make our own decisions. I think it sometimes end up on quite similar teams, because the set of data that a lot of us are working off of, content creators and otherwise, seems to be quite similar now. And there's quite a lot of prevailing or kind of assumed wisdom within the community and online that XG and XA is kind of the hallowed turf, the one metric that rules them all at the moment. Obviously, there's plenty of other metrics that you can look at and you can base your decisions off of, but I think that's like the easiest one. I was discussing this with a friend yesterday over a pint, and sometimes the data is used as almost an excuse to pick a player rather than you've actually watched the games and you feel like you know what you're talking about. Sometimes people hide behind the data as a reason when it should be a part of the picture, but not necessarily the whole thing. So yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, decision making needs to be made before the game week. You can't make it afterwards. So to say that your decisions were poor just because of the outcome, I think is a little bit possibly simplistic. Obviously, at the end of the season, if you are ranked 1 millionth, your decisions have been poor because the outcome has been poor, and those things do tally together over a long run. But over a 1 week, I would say, or even a small stretch of the season, I think you could make objectively good decisions based on everything you've seen, based on the data, based on all of these other factors. And sometimes they just conspire against you and it just doesn't work out. James Justin objectively probably wasn't a good pick away at Arsenal, and most people probably wouldn't have picked him. And I think anyone who says, who has him in their team right now and is lauding the fact that they had him as a great bit of decision making, that they somehow knew that he was going to bag his first ever career brace away against Arsenal, I think you're kind of fooling yourself a little bit. So yeah, there's a balance to strike here, but at the end of the day, Justin's not going to score a brace every week.
No, but I mean, Palmer might, and that's kind of
Palmer might, yeah.
And that's kind of, as you said, about the kind of the calculus people need to look at in terms of whether they want to go that way or not. To introduce another thing, the well trodden path of fear of missing out, that is going to be so much more prevalent this year because of the pricing and because of everything that you've just mentioned there, Sam. That's going to really dictate decision making, and I suppose every week almost when this happens, like, what's to say that next week? I mean, Arsenal playing Southampton, lots of people have sold Saka. What could possibly happen there potentially?
After tonight, I think less people are going to want to sell him.
Yeah, but those people probably have already made that decision, and
yeah,
there's got to, I think every week or every few weeks, you're going to have to carefully calculate it. Like, are you going to chase, or are you going to stick with the investments that you've made? Because I mean, that's going to be, I suppose, the difference. And then there's the whole butterfly effect of, okay, I've used a transfer this week on a certain player to bring them in. I've sold another one. And then I'm going to use a transfer again if I want to reverse it, because I've kind of, I've gone from player X who's scored double digits 1 week, sold him for player Y. Player Y's done nothing, and the guy that I've sold has then gone off and done massively. So, I think we're going to be kind of dealing with this conundrum a lot this year. I think there's going to be a lot of FOMO this year. I think there's definitely going to have to be an element of acceptance a little bit this year, that you simply are not going to be able to cover all the bases, and that was a luxury that we had last year. And I know I was only on Twitter like a very short period just to kind of see what people were saying, and I was flabbergasted, frankly, that people were upset about the way in which the pricing has kind of led to different outcomes. I mean, this is the whole point. This is why it's good.
Yeah, that's great.
Honestly, despite the fact that we've been on the receiving end this year, maybe a Stockholm syndrome. Yeah, maybe a Stockholm syndrome, but I wouldn't change a thing. And when it comes to the wildcards, yeah, okay, they haven't gone gangbusters this week, but I mean, I'm not sure when we all agreed to be in the process of deciding how good a wildcard was after 1 week. Maybe
apparently this week
yeah, incredible. And maybe it is just that a compound effect of all that content creator malarkey that you kind of gave voice to. Well, I mean, I think we're both kind of broadly happy with the process, and both kind of broadly kind of, I think, thought through this properly, and yeah, it's with all those sort of caveats in mind about not having them all. I think it's one of those things that we knew could happen. It's obviously an extreme example of what can happen, but we know that there were other players that we all overlooked. Like, you didn't have Watkins, for example. I did,
yeah,
and neither of us had Salah. It could have been any of those players. And on the other hand, it could have been that Saka makes that amazing performance translate into outcomes, and suddenly it's not that bad. Or Haaland, who obviously didn't score, really did everything he possibly could to score. So it's, as I said at the very beginning, it kind of felt like, take Palmer out of the equation, it was just a bad week in general, unless you captain Salah. But I mean, that's obviously stupid and reductivist, and you can't quite do that. But yeah, I mean, with Palmer specifically, Sam, I mean, you've got to laugh, as we're obviously doing what everyone else does in terms of the YouTube thumbnail. And it's one of those questions, I think, that whenever you've had a bad week, or whenever something's happened, and there's a player who I don't think it's fair to say wasn't in consideration for us. I think that he's not. If it's a player like James Justin, we're going to continue using that example, who's gone off, then I think we can both square that with ourselves, right? With Palmer, obviously he was in consideration for both of us along the line. There's kind of the feeling and why we didn't go with him, like all the different sort of bits and pieces. You know, he hadn't really looked like he had a 4-goal performance in him. Weren't too sure how it's being used under Maresca. There were sort of suspicions about X, Y, and Z about how he might kind of come out. But then you look at kind of people like late risers, like General, who kind of almost made him a priority in their teams, and that does kind of obviously leads you to wonder whether there's a hole somewhere in your decision making process. I mean, I don't know whether it's me being stubborn, or whether it's me being hubristic, but I kind of look at it and think, well, I didn't like the team with Palmer in it, and everything that I kind of the whole D-Rome research thing, which we're both quite hot on. Like, there was never a real moment when obviously he was a consideration. If I could have got him, I would have. But there was never a factor when that convinced me at least that I need to get this guy.
Yeah, with Palmer so far this season, he's had flashes. Obviously, did really well against Wolves, but that at the time did seem to be more of a Wolves problem than anything specifically Cole Palmer did. Nothing. They obviously scored a great goal in that game, but the 3 assists were almost carbon copies of each other. And Wolves really should have done better to mitigate against that. Other than that, didn't really look all that threatening generally. The data was also reflecting that at the time as well. But we did know just how explosive he can be from the season before. So it wasn't like he wasn't in our consideration. We were both messaging each other the night before about it a little bit. But I think we both kind of decided quite early on that budget-wise, we were very set on having both Saka and Haaland, because Haaland over the next 7 or 8 game weeks, I don't think most people wouldn't argue with this. He looks like a fantastic pick. From this week on, great run of fixtures. Going without him is going to be very tough. So on a wild card, you're going to want to include him rather than having to use a transfer in the future to get to him. Saka, okay, that it was 3 fixtures before the fixtures turned, and then maybe you can make a decision on him. But the first 3 was Leicester at home, Southampton at home, and then Bournemouth away. That is a great 3. And Saka did seem like more of a priority on pens, 90 minutes, just like Palmer, with better fixtures and slightly better data going into game week 6 as well. So it was a case of, okay, you're not getting rid of either of those. In our opinion anyway. Other people might disagree, but can you squeeze in a third premium? And all of the compromises that were being made in my side, I can only really speak for mine, seemed like too much to square away just to fit in one player that I wasn't going to captain this week anyway, and probably wouldn't captain for the next 6 weeks looking at the fixtures. So at that price, it seemed like a little bit too much. Obviously, we know that he does have those explosive hauls in him from last season, but wrongly, it seems. I thought that was less likely to happen given what we've seen under Maresca so far. He seemed more of a disciplined role, less license to roam and less license to kind of do whatever the hell he wanted. That obviously did not come to pass against Brighton. It was a great matchup in the end. Brighton played a ridiculously high line, got caught out so many times. Palmer could have had 6, genuinely. So it could have been even worse for us. But we only had that data available to us once the game started and once we saw how Brighton decided to set up against Chelsea. So obviously, if we'd known that, then maybe there would have been a slight difference. But I don't think the decision making going into the week was necessarily the worst. I think now we're kind of under pressure as to making a good decision based on what we now know Palmer and Chelsea to be, with the fixtures to come, which don't look the best. Is he worth ripping your team apart 1 week after a wild card to get that third premium in? Or, of course, some people are selling Saka, and maybe that's something that we're overlooking.
Maybe. I mean, we're all licking our wounds, and I think that some people do act in that situation and just think, right, okay, I'm going to be decisive here. I'm going to sort it out. And, I've said times outnumbered that actually a lot of the time, although it's not particularly sexy and not particularly engagement grabbing, doing nothing can actually be quite platonic a lot of the time, especially if you're acting out of not particularly sound judgment, perhaps, if you're making a raise transfer and so on and so forth. So yes, you're right, it's one of those where pre-game week and post-game week foresight and hindsight interact a little bit when it comes to this. You've seen the reasoning that maybe, and that this was used by people who did go with Palmer. So I'm not saying that this is a completely hindsighty thing, because if you did go with Palmer, then you can obviously point to it and say, hey, I was right.
Yeah,
Enough,
100%.
really.
Yeah.
But people were saying, Saka, that the points are more spread around at Arsenal, whereas Palmer, a little bit like Haaland at the moment, if there is a proper explosion, it's probably going to be focused around one man. Although Nicholas Jackson couple against Chelsea, for example, against West Ham, for example, maybe,
and Madueke as well,
detract from that a little bit. So yeah, it's one of those where it's sort of you can see how that sort of would come to pass. Put it that way, and I can see how basically this whole thing can come to pass. It's just been an extreme outcome, and as I said earlier on, I'm not in the business, even though I appreciate this is a results business. I'm not in the business of writing off an entire week's worth of hard thinking, or in my case, a few weeks worth of hard thinking, because I was doing a lot of stuff with all the relevant behavioural stuff surrounding sunk costs, etc., acknowledged. I'm not in the business of writing off my wildcard after one crap week, because you can have a crap week at any time in the season. It just always sort of feels a bit more galling, I guess, when it's come after you've made 10, 11 changes and carefully calibrated everything to fit in a certain way. The only final thing I just want to bring in here, Sam, is the other element of this year with the rolled up free transfers. I wonder, and I've mentioned this a couple of times over the last few weeks, in terms of premium hopping, whether with, and I think a lot of us did do this in our wildcard. And if you haven't wildcarded yet, then maybe something we think about. Or if you did wildcard in 3, 4, 5, I'm sure you kind of felt that there are a few players that I'm happy to kind of keep. I'm going to rotate around. Obviously, Morgan Rogers has been a bit of a godsend, really, in terms of just being like, just keep him in, whatever. But someone like Semenyo, for example, you're probably going to have a plan for him for 8 to 10 when they play Arsenal, Villa, and City. What you can do with all of that. So there are all these players that you're probably going to just kind of keep around. I wonder whether, as I said a few weeks ago, things will be flipped on the head a little bit when it comes to the free transfers. Like, I'm not sure if there's many people who don't own Palmer who haven't looked at Saka and gone, right, okay, well, after Bournemouth, do I just swap him over then? And do my free transfers this year become a bit of a FOMO negation tool? Is it my way of kind of hopping around the premiums as the fixtures sort of turn and twist in different kind of players' favours? Maybe with the exception of Haaland, who I suspect has gone past the point of no return, at least up until kind of November or whenever it is, when their fixtures become slightly harder. But it's City, so their fixtures are never hard really, apart from Arsenal, and not going to face them until February. So yeah, maybe the rolled up free transfers may allow for more chasing, and there's be a justification surrounding that if we're keeping the other guys kind of safe and sound.
Yeah, look, if you can fill out the rest of your side with reliable, good picks that are going to start week in, week out, and I think there are quite a few of those options at the moment, that there are cheap options in midfield and up front who are 90-minute men on penalties with decent data, that you can probably just say, fine, I'm going to keep these guys, even if the fixtures aren't great. I'll hold on to them in the majority. Obviously, you can make a little transfer here or there with them. But on the whole, prioritize those big moves on the premium assets. And I'd said this at the start of the season, that I really wanted to try and prioritize the maximum benefits for my transfers as well. So those are obviously going to be the premium positions more often than not. But also with that comes the most risk as well, because the players that you get rid of are the best players in the league and they can haul against anyone. We've seen that with Palmer. We've seen that with Saka, Salah, Haaland in the past as well at different moments. They are more than capable, even against the toughest opposition, to haul in any given game week. So there is risk attached to that strategy. I think that the way to win FPL this season will be by getting those moves right at perhaps times where other people aren't making those bets. So obviously the masses will probably see a fixture swing for Saka coming, sell him the week that you're about to see a sea of red on the FDR. And who knows, if you've timed that wrongly and someone else has timed that correctly a week before or a week after, they might be 10, 20 points ahead of you if there's an extreme outcome like there was this week. So yeah, having a little bit of guile about you to try and figure out something that someone else might be missing or the masses might be missing on those big premium moves, or hopping on one that maybe hasn't really performed that well so far, that you've just got a bit of a feeling is about to hit a hot streak and it pays off. That's, I think, how you get a very, very decent rank this season. And obviously you need to make sure all of the other picks are kind of safe and kind of settled. And hopefully that's what you can use a wild card for this year.
Definitely. I mean, we'll dig into that a lot more on the pod next week, actually. We've got Nick himself coming on to discuss all of these things and how he's approached things differently this year, especially being a little bit more, I guess, distance from FPL up until this point. But yeah, no, hopefully that was kind of vaguely useful. I think it's always kind of worth having an introspection when things haven't gone the way that you want them to. But I wouldn't be kind of using the gif of the lovely African men carrying the coffin for my own season quite yet. Okay, quick eye test thing before we go to the game week preview. I just wanted to mention Leif Davis again.
Brilliant.
It's an odd one. It's kind of a reverse eye test because I already own the guy. He did make it into my wild card though. I did have a busy weekend. One of my best friends is back in the UK from the Philippines for a short while. Obviously, I checked my acquisition, Sam, and so we had 7 key passes, a decent XA of 0.5. Well, that's a really, really dodgy metric according to the stats guys. I looked at the FB ref. His XA is pretty low, like 50th. But one cool thing to see was his shot creating actions. He's 18th for that, and it sounds unimpressive, but there's some names around him, the likes of Pedro Porro, Morgan Rogers, Anthony Gordon, Bumo, Bowen, and Luis Diaz, all in the same sort of area as he has. That's lipstick on a pig, that's for sure. Like shot creating actions is basically what we used to look at. Remember, we used to look at chances created before X data came along.
Yeah,
It's the ugly cousin of the expected data, but it's still a crumb of comfort, when it comes to his presence in my team. So I watched Match of the Day, of course. I only had time for Match of the Day 2 this week, and not seen the big games, thankfully, as non-Palmer owner. Good to see Phil Jones on Match of the Day too. Good to see he's keeping himself busy. Had a laugh at Man United, rubbernecking the train crash. But Ipswich Villa was what I was there to see. And Watkins and Rogers, the combo was really useful. But from Davis, what was really interesting about him was that he's basically at the root of quite a lot of Ipswich's attacks. Really good delivery. Yeah. We know he's got it from set plays. But I came away from it thinking there's definitely a bit of a doubty from last year about him. You're just going to get points at random intervals against random teams. And that's more than good enough for the first bench or defender 3.5, as me, Nick Maynard and Paul have mentioned in the past. And there were a couple of good moments, coming up on the overlap, a great ball in for Clark who should have scored. Delap's second goal, by the way, woof, really, really nice. Foot manager legend, Liam Delap. I won't be playing him this week versus West Ham unless we hear Lewis isn't starting, but I'm more than happy to have him coming into my team when Semenyo's fixtures toughen in that little passage I told you about earlier. Everton, Brentford and Leicester, I think, are the 3 that he's there for. So yeah, just a nice little rotation option if you're not on wildcard and haven't been on wildcard or used your wildcard, but you need like a cheap player at some point going forward. It's not particularly revolutionary, but it does feel like kind of the proof of the pudding is in the eating a little bit in terms of Leif Davis. He does look like he's a decent prospect for FPL, keeping decent company, at least in the beta stats. In the alpha stats, absolutely nowhere, but in the beta stats, I mean, it's good enough if you do need a player like that. Cool. All right. Game week ahead preview. Let's move away from this wreckage and hope the next week is better. The Kneejerk, and the Kneejerk is up first. Palmer in immediately. I mean, we've kind of really touched on this a little bit, but it is an absolute fire sale for the likes of Salah, the likes of Saka, and the likes of Eze as well, actually, who we can discuss in a second. Almost 500,000 transfers for Palmer, which is not a surprise to any man, woman, or beast, right, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, look, he was absolutely phenomenal and has reminded everyone just how good he was last season. I think the only reason he wasn't captain more last season was because of his price. So it's a bit of a misnomer there. But Yeah, look, I completely understand anyone buying him. It's just whether or not it's at the expense of someone else who's objectively a very good pick this week. Saka, obviously being the one in both of our teams. If we're looking at that move in particular, it does feel a little bit knee jerky because like, on the face of it, obviously the points reflect that Palmer is just a phenomenal pick and Saka did nothing, hasn't been explosive at all this season. But watching the full 90 at the Emirates this week, this weekend gone, there is no chance that Saka is a bad pick. He was absolutely phenomenal. He ran the show, 7 shots, 6 chances created. I think it might be 5 after that was attributed away from him, as we mentioned at the top of the show. But he was absolutely fantastic. And ahead of Southampton at home. As someone with an extensive knowledge on Southampton, I can tell you that is dangerous. You can't not expect him to do well in that game. The only way that I can possibly make peace with it in my own team is if I did some sort of double switch to also bring in Trossard as well, and then that would give me the coverage of Arsenal against Southampton. And for what it's worth, I really like Trossard at the moment. He was brilliant as well, much more central than Saka and on the end of a lot of the chances, whereas Saka was almost either creating the chances for himself or for someone else, whereas Trossard kind of just picked up the pieces. He was in the right areas, almost acting as a second pressing forward alongside Havertz.
Yeah, that's how they're playing at the moment.
And against Southampton, that's going to work. I will tell you that for free. So, yeah, I think Trossard could be a really decent pickup this week. Not a long-term pick necessarily, but whilst Ødegaard's out, it's his place to lose, I think. So that's the only way I can kind of get around this knee jerk and say maybe you can get rid of Saka and bring in Palmer if there was a way to bring in Trossard as well for free. But generally speaking, with the fixtures to come, I think I'd probably be holding on to Saka and finding a very, very big sofa in case Palmer does it again. Although it is worth noting, Nottingham Forest defensively are pretty decent, and I'd be surprised if they left the high line that Brighton did and gave Palmer the sort of freedom that he had. And again, it's also worth noting he had 1 penalty and 1 absolute worldy free kick in there as well, which isn't the most repeatable of events necessarily. Those will be loud occurrences that happen once or twice a season. So, yeah, he's a great pick, don't get me wrong. But do you need to rip your team up for him? I don't think you do.
Yeah, Forest their best defence this year after 6 games. Last year they finished 5th. I'm assuming it wouldn't have gone unnoticed what happened to Brighton after playing in that certain way. I'm not going to do it. Is how I'll start this. I just wonder outside of the context of us having just wildcarded, we've made this kind of transfer. We, as in not you and I, but just we plural, have all made this transfer in the past where a player does go off and you just think, you know what, I might as well just cover that straight away.
Gotta have him.
And that to me, I wouldn't quite call this a knee jerk. Like if you could go there, if you just think, you know what, okay, thanks Salah, I've had a great time, but you've got a couple of Palace up next to him, and
I would do it for Salah.
Yeah, I mean, he's looked a little bit rangy to say the least for a little while. So fair play, I can understand that. So I wouldn't quite kind of refer to this as a knee jerk, but I think it is one where there can be knee jerk tendencies surrounding it.
It depends who you're selling, I think.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely going to be a huge proportion of people within the near 500,000 who have just knee jerks that basically, oh, he's done loads of points, I'm getting him in, and it maybe prove right. And I've completely been on the other side of it in the past, where I've just kind of got a player in, just thinking, what, screw it, I've seen enough. So yeah, I get it. It's just not quite at the moment. I think neither of us are quite rushing there right now. But I think I'm sure we've both looked at our teams and gone, right, how do we make this work if it does kind of seem to be an unstoppable train? I wouldn't be surprised if like next year, for example, it's kind of Palmer and Haaland are the two that you have all season, because they're the ones who are kind of like Salah and Haaland in the past, or Salah and Kane in the past. They're the two that kind of just passed the armband between them. Yeah, I don't know if we can call it a knee jerk, but it is. I think there are some knee jerks within the transfers that are being made. In
Yeah.
terms of the transfers themselves, Sam. So yeah, fair bit going on. Palmer, as I mentioned, Bumo, 240,000 transfers in, had a really good run. That makes a lot of sense to me. Definitely, that's absolutely fine. A lot of people are giving up on Eze. Finally, I mean, I expressed my reservations to you several times. I'm not going to go over that again, but I can see why he's down 0.2 now, Eze. And
Mm.
it's a bit of a shame because I love the player. It's just it's not quite translating into FPL returns at the moment. Nick Jackson, almost 200,000 transfers in for him. I think people selling Isaac are just kind of looking for other options effectively. I know João Pedro is the highest sold player still, like 300,000 transfers. So I was just like very glad to bank that 0.1 I got on him, take it and run, and just forever be upset that I didn't play him against Arsenal. Nah, I shouldn't. I could never have foreseen the red card. Dwight McNeil, Sam, who I denigrated as being a bit of a yes, a bit of an all fart no poo specialist, appears to have blown his load a little bit. But I mean, I'm still, really good fixtures to come. I said to Sean FPL Spirit Blues on Twitter, the Planet FPL Everton correspondent. I'm never saying no to a player. Like I'm not the kind of I've done it in the past where I've been really stubborn about an individual, never signing him. I think it was Jota a few years back, and then I was just like, well, you know what? I mean, it's just stupid. So if he does. He's always going to be a good option over this short while. Like if I need to make money, if I sell Diaz for him, then I'm not going to I'm going to hold my nose and do it, frankly. Yes, I intended to say hold my nose in terms of the other stuff. On the other side, Saka, Salah, as I mentioned, Isaac being sold. So yeah, all kind of makes sense. I think I've got no real problem with buying the likes of McNeil, and I suppose you're kind of quite happy with Calvert-Lewin as well this week and kind of going forward because he's got really good fixtures. It's again just one of those that I'm not particularly convinced on, but I can understand why you went there.
It's just a means to an end, honestly. If I was wildcarding this week, I'd actually be quite tempted to go with Delap ahead of him for that extra 0.5 saving, who also has great fixtures. But yeah, Everton's run looks really decent. Calvert-Lewin's data doesn't look too terrible, and he's on penalties and he's fit again. So look, I mean, I don't think he's an incredible pick, but for 6 million, I do quite like him. And honestly, I do still prefer him ahead of Dwight McNeil right now. The data for McNeil looks good. It's mainly assist skewed. And I will always be flexible like you with any of these picks. I'm open to it. And I don't mind him as a pick at the price at 5.5. It's a good pickup. I think I do still marginally prefer DCL. And again, it's important not to just color our decision making with one game week's worth of outcome where McNeil scored one screamer, got another, and DCL did nothing. We've also seen the reverse happen in the last few game weeks as well. So what will happen over the next 5 or 6 game weeks while Everton's good run continues? Who knows? But I think having the striker on penalties that most of Dwight McNeil's threat is assist data, which we know is a bit sketchy, but who are they aiming for? Calvert-Lewin. So I like the sound of that quite a lot. And for 6 million, I don't think it's the worst pickup in the world as long as he stays fit. Again, if you're happy with the assister, generally, I don't think you're going to get many braces from him. Then Dwight McNeil also fits the bill pretty nicely. It's a great run. He's always starting and everything runs through him at the moment. So yeah, don't mind him at all either.
Yeah. I think it'll be one of those weeks really where people either hold on or they make a judgment that I need to get Palmer. That kind of feels like where it's kind of going, unless we see an injury,
Mainly.
of course, in the competitions in midweek.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. On to bold claims. Still 1-0 to you. I put when I did this earlier on, it was a question mark for my one, but it is a no for me now. But you were close actually.
I was close. Yeah, I went with Salah and Diaz to both outscore Saka. In the end, it was just Salah. Diaz did nothing, although it wouldn't have taken much to outscore Saka. So yeah, I was close enough. That's a few now I've been pretty close on, but didn't quite pan out. So yeah, fingers crossed for next week. But yeah, for now, it's still just 1-0, isn't it? Yeah,
so I had my original team outscores my wildcard team. The original team scored free. I had to take some kind of liberties that I wouldn't have made the transfer. So that meant that Munoz came in rather than me making a transfer. But then obviously that would have been too high and sizey. So as it was, and I captained Haaland in that rather than captaining in Salah or Jota, for example. So got my original got 43. Then my current team is doesn't like Semenyo's gonna get any bonus, just been hooked. So I'm going to end up on 48, which is what it is, but it means I don't get my bold claim this week. I think I'll probably take the points over that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So still 1-0. And what are you setting up with this week?
Yeah, so after your eye test section as well, I'm also really hot on Leif Davis. I watched the Villa game on TV against Ipswich, and he was brilliant. I think the data looks decent as well. And this week, I'm backing him for a double-digit haul. So I'm backing him probably for an assist, clean sheet, and therefore some bonus as well. So yeah, could be a bit of an outside shout, but I think he's due, if you can ever be due, a big return as a left back. I think he's on the roster for one, and I think this could be the week.
I'm hoping it's not this week. I'm hoping it's next week. Unless Rico Lewis gets injured or doesn't, or we find out he's not starting, in which case, yes, please be this week. He is one of those players who could be. He's on the all fart no poo watch, basically, for me a little bit. But I do think that he's just so involved, and the fixtures for Ipswich is why I kept him. Are so good up until kind of mid-December, I think.
Yeah.
So he was just one of those where I was just like, yeah, you know what. He's great, and if I do kind of just think, well, you know what, it's not worked out with Rico Lewis, then I can just play him and just get a 4.0, whoever it is at that point, and see how it goes from there. For me, I'm very, 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 very happy that United have decided to keep Erik ten Hag. I've got a long-term bold claim here, Sam, which is very close to coming in. That a bold BALD and manager gets sacked first. So I think they've given him 2 matches, the Champions League, the Europa League, and they've given Europa's Conference League, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, I don't care. And then the Villa game, and I think that game's going to have loads of goals in it. Honestly, I think I'm so glad to have Watkins and Rodgers for that game. I think that could be really like a very exciting game. Frankly, loads and loads of goals going on, and hopefully Ten Hag will be sacked. Obviously I'm not in the business of wanting people to be sacked, but he's not going to worry about him. His life's not going to be very difficult if he is sacked. To be honest, he'll get a massive
payout. Will be all right.
It's all okay. He'll be absolutely fine. He can pitch up. Don't know, at some club somewhere in not very long. So yeah, very happy to have Watkins and Rodgers for that one. I think there'll be loads of goals in that. So yeah, 5+ goals in Villa versus United for me.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I think you've got a decent chance of that coming in, Tom.
I hope so. I hope it's Watkins hat-trick and a Rodgers goal and all this sort of thing. That's why I pay for you, Watkins. We both love Watkins. I've actually put my own in my mouth as, yeah, we shall see. Cool. All right. And best captions this week. I think this is worth a bit of a discussion actually, because we've got Haaland and Saka on the thing on YouTube, but that's mainly because I didn't have time to update it. But yeah, I got Haaland, Saka, Palmer, maybe also Salah in the mix. Obviously, hugely team dependent. But I don't know. After Southampton's performance, reminding us, I suppose, that they're taking the idea of a South Coast derby fairly literally in terms of the derby bit anyway. I'm sure there are lots of armbands that moved over from Haaland to Saka after that. There's definitely going to be a little bit in. And you said last week about you did go with Haaland in the end, but there's got to be an opportunity to captain a player versus a promoted team at some point. I mean, surely this is the time. I mean, that's where my armband, I think, is going to end up now, but I'm not sure yet. There may be some FOMO around Haaland that I may end up having. I fancy having 11 players rather than 10 as I go into the week.
Yeah, I don't know whether I call it FOMO to go with a player who scored 10 in 6 and playing at home against a mid-table club. I still think it's a fantastic shout for captaincy at home to Fulham. But yeah, look, Southampton are there for the taking right now. Arsenal will press them high. They did against Leicester at times and it worked. And Leicester are not Southampton in those regards. We will commit to playing out from the back all the way through the 90, no matter what. And yeah, Arsenal will pick us apart, and they will get those chances. I think my assumption is that, like you said, towards the middle of the pod, Arsenal will probably share around the points a little bit. I can see Trossard doing well. I can see Martinelli doing all right. Obviously, Havertz as well. Saka absolutely falls into that and will likely do pretty well himself. But if the points are shared around, will he also only get a share of the bonus, perhaps? And therefore, Haaland, who is pretty much like drawing in with the biggest sense of gravity you've ever seen right now, all of the bonus points, all of the goal scoring chances for City, he could easily get another hat-trick at home to Fulham. And I'm not going to forget just how lethal he can be just because he blanked once so far this season. I think for me at the moment, Haaland is the bus team captain for me, and I think it will be pretty tough for me to be convinced that he's not the best option this week. I think he's just that much more of the talisman for Man City than Saka is for Arsenal. Even in a better fixture for Arsenal, I still back Man City to get 3 or 4 goals. Haaland will probably get 2 to 3 of them. So yeah, I think for me, he's my captain.
That's it. It comes down to talisman theory, doesn't it, a little bit? So with Saka, it's more of a gamble almost that he will be. It's one of those where you see it as kind of a regulation 4-0, don't you? I'm afraid that the Arsenal game, we score 3 in the first half, just kind of ping it around for a bit. In the second half, maybe it'll be like the backup sort of the B team who are on. I wouldn't be surprised if Saka gets subbed off in the first after half time. To be honest, if we're 3-0 up. It would not surprise me at all. The fourth goal scored by Sterling, assisted by Nwaneri, something like that. So it's kind of the bet would be that Saka's involved in those sort of first kind of three goals in the first sort of 30 minutes. And if you get a goal and assist out of that, then I think you're probably laughing. As long as Haaland doesn't match it. And that's kind of the main sort of thing that's in my head at the moment. As all of your points are really good because, as you said, it's kind of a bit of a vortex, a black hole for those chances and for those points. So it's kind of safety versus just hoping that Lady Luck shines on you for that day. If you are without Saka and you've got Haaland and you're looking at kind of Palmer or Salah, what would you still be kind of favouring Haaland basically in all drafts with Haaland in them?
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, I think he is the best captain this week ahead of those players. Look, as we saw, they can pop off in any given week. They've got the quality to beat him in any given week, but we're playing odds here, or at least I am, and I think that Haaland is the most likely player to have a haul this week, even against stronger opposition than Saka's got. Probably, arguably, the same / stronger opposition than some of the others have got as well. I think. Yeah, for me, he's a better captaincy option than Salah, Saka, Palmer this week. But that doesn't mean any of them are bad picks. And look, you roll the dice 100 times on this set of fixtures, and maybe 30 of the times, one of the other players ends up being the better pick. So it's absolutely something you could take a bit of a gamble on. I just think that there's safety with Haaland, and he's the most likely one to score the big haul.
Yeah. I'm very between Saka and Haaland, to be honest. And if you didn't own the big man, I suppose you kind of just default to Saka. But there's definitely, I suppose, some interest in Palmer and maybe even Watkins as well. If you're just kind of buying into the swan song for Ten Hag. But that's quite good. If we're having a bit of fun with FPL, but I think if you're kind of taking it seriously, I suppose it's in those players, and it's very difficult to look past those two at the moment. Yeah, maybe you're right about Haaland. We'll see what happens by the end of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you don't have Haaland, there are some great other picks, so it's not something to be necessarily worried about. It's just obviously if you've got all of them, or if you've got a select couple of them, including Haaland, then for me, he's my favourite right now.
Nice. All right, teams for the weekend.
Let's do it. You're first up, Tom.
Yep, I'm similar to you. I'm rolling, just because that was always part of the plan, to do that, and then reassess as we go forward. I've got the captaincy armband flitting around, basically, between Saka and Haaland. It's currently on Saka and team that's kind of in front of you, but who knows? It could end up being on Haaland. It's very, I'm very 50-50 on that, actually. There's obviously the element that last week going against Haaland obviously massively paid off, but as you said, it's not quite the same kind of situation, especially at home. It's very difficult to back against Haaland at home, and Tasman Theory, I think, maybe the tipping point for me. But yeah, I'm again hopeful of a good outcome. Rico Lewis is obviously one I'll be keeping an eye on towards the start of the game week. Hopefully, we'll get some sort of tip off about his starting or not, and if not, then he will be swapped out for Leif Davis against West Ham, which is quite a good sort of thing. But yeah, everyone is looking pretty good. All present accounted for. I've only got one free transfer, so again, it completely kind of lends itself to just kind of rolling through and hoping that I don't get spanked too hard by Palmer and Salah, which basically is how it is at the moment. I saw that Ross Stewart played 45 minutes, Sam. So yeah, the template buster. He's going to come in game week 8 when I need him versus Leicester. But yeah, all good, I think. All good. I wouldn't be surprised if with double defense that suddenly it's going to turn into a bit of a poo show. It's one of those things, isn't it? We've invested in it, and then it would be so FPL if Southampton and Bournemouth do end up kind of scoring against us while we kind of let our foot off the gas a little bit. But hey, I'm feeling confident again about this week, and I'm very kind of happy to put last week in my rearview mirror a little bit.
Yeah, same here. And I, again, a bit like you, I'm pretty happy with my lineup ahead of game week 7. Not looking currently at making any transfers whatsoever. Raya in goal, Gabriel, Trent, Lewis at the back. Obviously, like you, I'll keep an eye on Lewis, but I've got Mikalenko if I really want it, or Greaves to come off the bench. I'll probably just start with Lewis regardless, and then if he needs to get subbed off, then so be it. 5 across the middle: Diaz, Semenyo, Mbuemo, Saka, Rodgers. Vice on Saka at the moment, as already discussed. And up top, Solanke alongside Haaland, who has the armband. I really like Solanke. I thought he looked good against United. I think he's looked good in most of the matches so far this season that he has played in. And against Brighton's high line, who knows? Could get a Palmer-esque call. I think I'm owed one. That would be great. So yeah, if you're listening, Dominic, that would be fantastic. I'd love you forever. And yeah, at the moment, benching Calvert-Lewin for Rodgers, who I just feel like is on a little bit of a hot run at the moment. He's starting to come good. Confidence is up, tails up against a Man United side that just looks really, really all at sea. I think he can take advantage there. So I'm happy enough benching Calvert-Lewin for that one. But again, also, if there was a shock injury or something like that, I'm also happy enough having to lean on him if I really, really needed to. So yeah, look, there are players I'm missing. No matter what moves I made, there would be players that I'm missing. So you're just going to have to hope that the variance strikes in my favour this game week, I guess.
I'm sure there's a remontada to come. That's for sure. Especially going into the international break, you want to have that green arrow going into it, don't you? Really. Cool. All right. I think that's everything this week.
Yeah, I think it is. And hopefully you've enjoyed the show if you've been watching along live. If you have been watching, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a follow on social channels. So on X, we're at WGTA_FPL, or myself, just FPL Pricey on there. And Instagram and Threads as well, WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there as well. But again, if you're watching along live, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the stream. It really does go a long way. And of course, if you're listening along on audio, if you could give us a 5-star rating, if you've got the time, that would be really appreciated as well. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for listening. We are Who Got the Assist. And Tom, any final words?
Thanks for coming on. We hope you enjoyed the pod. Next week, as mentioned, we'll be joined by high-flying Nick himself. As part of our kind of international break offering, we discuss how involvement in FPL can change how you make decisions. We hope this you feel a bit better if you didn't do as well as you wanted to this week. But hey, it won't be like this every week, I promise. Speak to you very, very soon. Have a good week.
Oh, It's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?